now be taking any points of motions. Ukraine.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Ukraine motions for a 2-minute moderated caucus with a speaking time of 30 seconds. Thank you.
Is that a 2-minute moderated caucus?
Yes, on the topic of long-term reconstruction efforts. Thank you.
And as you're signing here, it would be great if you guys could get a little bit more specific in your motioning, because that is a little broad, but I'll accept it. All right. Are there any other points of motion on the floor? Canada?
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Canada motions for a 3-minute moderated caucus with a 30-second speaking time on distinctions between responses to man-made and natural disasters.
Distinctions on
Man-made and natural disasters.
Can you repeat the time for me?
3-minute moderated caucus, 30-second speaking time.
I will be accepting one more motion. Russia?
Thank you, Chair. Fellow delegates, Russia moves to 3 minutes moderated caucus with a 30-second speaking time on the topic of involving NGOs,
Oh,
non-government organizations.
Involving NGOs.
oh. Involving NGOs? Okay. All right, we will now be voting in order received, starting with Ukraine's motion for a 2-minute moderated caucus with a 30-second speaking time on long-term reconstruction. All those in favor of this motion, please raise your placards now. All those against? This motion does not pass. We'll now be voting on Canada's motion for a 3-minute moderated caucus with a 30-second speaking time on distinction on man and natural
Man-made natural disasters.
man-made natural disasters. Was it?
Man-made and natural.
So a distinction between the two
Thank you.
in response.
All those in favor of this motion, please raise your placards now. All those against? This motion does not pass. We'll now be voting on Russia's motion for a 3-minute moderated caucus with a 30-second speaking time on involving NGOs. All those against? This motion passes. Would you like to speak first or last?
I'll speak last.
Last?
Yeah.
Okay. All those wishing to speak, please raise your placards now. India? Yep, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Many IDPs are in a state of prolonged dependency on government assistance when natural or man-made disasters happen. Promoting self-reliance by involving local survivors and refugees in the process of building and reconstruction efforts allows them to go back to their self-reliant ways upon reintroduction into their communities. Thank you.
Thank you, delegate. All those wishing to speak, please raise your placards now. Bangladesh?
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. The People's Republic of Bangladesh believes that it is imperative to involve NGOs in any reconstruction efforts. However, we must clarify, rather, the People's Republic of Bangladesh would like to emphasize the fact that while NGOs are mostly involved in the short-term reconstructive process, we as the United Nations must provide a means for these NGOs to link to long-term reconstructive efforts. This is imperative, as while we may be able to save lives in the short term, we must be able to create a sustainable solution that will stand the test of time for these individuals in the long term. And NGOs and allowing them to yeah, that's it.
Thank you, delegate. All those wishing to speak, please raise your placards now. North Korea?
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. North Korea does believe that the involvement of NGOs is essential. But North Korea is worried that the involvement of NGOs is what tends to complicate the response time because we don't know who's in charge. If you don't know who's in charge, we cannot solve the situation. What North Korea does believe we need to be doing is be working with NGOs to have preventative measures in place, identifying the countries most susceptible to the conflicts, and then putting the NGOs there with preventative measures before they happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. All those wishing to speak, please raise your placards now. Saudi Arabia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Saudi Arabia believes that it is very necessary for NGOs to be involved for the sake of sovereignty. It can be very discouraging if you were a nation who is suffering from a natural disaster to have other countries come together to aid you, and it can almost feel as if it's not self-sustaining. We feel that NGOs are more efficient. We feel that NGOs can help protect for self-reliance rather than foreign intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. I will now be accepting the last speaker before Russia speaks. Are there any, if you would like to speak in this moderated caucus, please raise your placards now. Cuba, you have the floor for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Cuba agrees strongly with North Korea's sentiment that while non-government organizations are vital, chain of command issues come into play. So strict and specific contingency plans that not only allocate who will do what, but who's in charge of who and who answers to who are vital. Another issue that Cuba strongly wants to emphasize is the issue of budgeting, and these contingency plans should have a percentage as the NGOs will get alongside other services. Thank you.
Russia?
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Russia needs for shelters grows every year, and like more people need these houses and shelters where they live. So we would like to involve NGOs because they can help us with budgeting and they can share their experience. We would like to create different agencies to create cooperation between government and these organizations. It could help us to react faster on these disasters, and we could create a special database which can help us. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there any points or motions on the floor? Canada?
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Canada motions for a 1 minute and 30-second extension of the current moderated caucus.
Are there any other points or motions on the floor? North Korea?
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. North Korea motions for a 3-minute moderated caucus with a 30-second speaking time on our capabilities to reduce response time. Thank you.
Whose vote is on that?
Improving our response time.
I will now be accepting one more motion. Are there any other points of motions on the floor? Ukraine?
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Ukraine motions for a 3-minute suspension of the meeting.
We will now be voting in order of most disruptive, starting with Canada's motion for a 1-minute extension of this current moderated caucus. All those in favor of this motion, please raise your placards now. This motion does not pass. We will now be voting on Ukraine's 3-minute suspension of the meeting. All those in favor of this motion, please raise your placards now. All those against this motion? This motion does not pass. We will now be voting on North Korea's motion for a 3-minute moderated caucus with 30-second speaking time on capabilities on improving response time. All those in favor of this motion, please raise your placards now. All those against? This motion passes. North Korea, would you like to speak first or last?
Speak last.
All those wishing to speak in this moderated caucus, please raise your placards now. Ethiopia?
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. For many years, a great deal of efforts and resources were wasted on post-disaster response, recovery, and rehabilitation rather than pre-disaster preparedness and prevention measures. We need to promote self-reliance rather than work on striving to get the NGOs out there quicker by involving the public in preventative measures before.
Just for clarification, I usually try to let you guys finish your sentences before I knock, because I want to hear that last information that you're trying to give. So don't look at my timer. All those wishing to speak in this moderated caucus, please raise your placards now. Bangladesh?
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. The People's Republic of Bangladesh has been a champion for preventative measures. Over the past decade, the People's Republic of Bangladesh has incorporated numerous different measures to ensure that to ensure the most effective response to natural disasters when they happen. Now, Bangladesh echoes the sentiments expressed by Ethiopia. However, the Bangladesh does want to add that while NGOs may complicate some matters and self-reliance in the community is definitely effective, the involvement of NGOs in preventative measures specifically is actually very beneficial to minimizing response time. In fact, regardless of the community-based preventative measures that we implement, we must also involve NGOs in the process.
Thank you, Delegate. All those wishing to speak in this moderated caucus, please raise your placards now. USA?
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. We agree with the delegate from Ethiopia. The U.S. Agency of International Development is committed to decreasing response time, and that means that we as the international community strike before disaster strikes. That means that we make sure that governments and states are prepared for disasters and that we have warning systems in place so that people know on the ground whether or not a disaster is coming their way faster than the disaster can reach their shores. That will decrease the amount of lives that are lost and will increase our response time. Thank you.
All those wishing to speak, please raise your placards now. UAE?
Thank you, Honorable Chairs and fellow delegates. UAE would like to echo the sentiments expressed by USA and would like to highlight to the committee today that every post-disaster situation is unique, and post-disaster reconstruction is a long, complex process. We need to draw from both the top-down and bottom-up approach, like Canada had mentioned previously, in order to improve our response time to these emergency situations. We need to look at preventative measures as well as provide a framework for communities to allow for this reconstruction. It's imperative that we have the institutional knowledge inside of the community as well as coordination between specific agencies. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now be taking the last speaker before North Korea speaks. If you wish to speak in this unmoderated, if you wish to speak in this moderated caucus, please raise your placards now. Poland.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Poland echoes the sentiments of the UAE. We believe in order to address response time issues, we must consider the structural root causes of vulnerabilities and help communities participate, prepare, and prevent extreme events by increasing the resilience of their economic infrastructures. By creating Poland proposes possible resilience facilities that we would like to expand upon in the next UNMOD. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. North Korea?
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. North Korea echoes the sentiments of Russia in their initiation of information sharing. We believe that this is the role of the United Nations, is to set goals and direct the NGOs in the right area. We believe that by instilling preventative measures, maintaining power sovereignty, without colluding or complicating the issue like the IDEV solution proposed by the USA, we believe that we would accomplish our main initiative of reducing response times. Thank you.
That exhausts this current moderated caucus. Are there any other points? Are there any points or motions on the floor? Russia?
Thank you, Chair. Fellow delegates, Russia motions for 6 minutes on mod.
The motion is in order. Are there any other points or motions on the floor? Saudi Arabia?
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Saudi Arabia motions for a 4-minute suspension to the meeting.
Thank you, Delegate. I will now be accepting one more motion. Are there any other points or motions on the floor? Canada?
Thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Canada motions for a 3-minute moderated caucus with a 30-second speaking time on specific plans and approaches to short-term reconstruction. Thank you.
And that was a 3-minute, 30-minute, 3-minute?
Yes.
We will now be voting in order received, starting with Russia's motion for a 6-minute suspension of the meeting. All those in favor of this motion, please raise your placards. Please raise your placards now. All those against? You're now in a 6-minute unmoderated caucus.